So if you see here in the palace, you can see only these white plasters. This was actually all the inlay work, precious and semi-precious stones. This entire palace was done up with glass and mirrors. So this would have created such a beautiful effect. But after 1857, the fall of the Mughal Empire, the whole fort was vandalized. All the precious stones were taken away. The inlay work was all gouged out. So we have hardly anything left.
Hello and welcome to Outlook's Bibliofile, the place to come to for authors, for books, for publishers, anything to do with the publishing industry. Today we are going to be discussing this fascinating book, City of My Heart. This is an account of the life that went on inside the Red Fort, and what better place to discuss this than at the Red Fort itself. We have with us the author of the book, historian, scholar, author, but above all that, a passionate storyteller, Rana Safvi. Thank you, ma'am, for coming to joining Bibliofile. It's a pleasure to have you here. From what I gather, this is there's 4 translations of 3 books and a couple of short stories, all of them written in the 1800s, and describing the life within the fort. Is that right?
One is written in 1885, but the others are written in the early part of the 20th century, in 1920, 1934, and they describe life in the fort as well as in the city of Shahjahanabad. And the 4th book, which is the short stories, describes what happened to the survivors of the Mughal Empire, because after the fall of Delhi, when the British took control of the fort, they chased and killed almost all the royals. Some managed to escape. So the story is of the survivors.
And we read in the book that the fort that we see today, it's only 20% of what the original fort was. Isn't that right?
Yes, because this was a densely populated fort. There were about 2,000 to 3,000 people living inside. There were workshops, there were nobles with their armies and their retinues, as well as the entire haram-sara of the palace. But after the British took over, they systematically took down all the buildings which they felt interfered with direct supervision of the fort, so that no other rebellion can take place. Also, they took down all the buildings which were associated with the mutiny, as they called it.
So this was a sort of a revenge or sort of a
reprisal against the Mughal Empire. And the whole thing probably would have got destroyed if Lord Canning had not heard of it and interfered. So Lord Canning saved whatever was left of the Diwan-e-Khas, the Diwan-e-Aam, some of the palaces in the women's section, the Zanana, and a few of the other, like the gates. And the gates, of course, they would keep because that was defensive for them, and Naubat Khana.
I see. So maybe we can now go inside and take a look at the places that Rana is describing. Shall we? One of the most fascinating things in the book I found was that it was actually not a red fort at all. It was mostly white inside. Is that right? I mean, it's actually the plaster which has gone off, which we see now.
The original name was Qalai Mubarak or Qalai Shahjahani. Later on, towards the 18th century, it starts getting called Qalai Molla, or the Exalted Fort. The Qalai Mubarak means blessed fort or auspicious fort. And then by the time the later Mughals come, that is the end, towards the end of the Mughal dynasty, where Bahadur Shah is ruling, it starts getting called Lal Haveli, because by then the plaster has fallen off, and none of the late, like Bahadur Shah, Akbar Shah, none of them have the money to really plaster it and put it back again. Now there was a thick lime plaster on the walls, on the red sandstone, and on that were paintings, floral, gilding, a lot of golden work was done. And I normally tell everybody that if you want to see what the Lal Killa would have looked like originally, you should visit the Jain Mandirs. Because the Jain Mandirs are
intact.
Beautifully, yes, and they're beautifully painted from inside. Over here you have some of the original paint, where you can see in the wall they will enclose it with glass. In fact, this was also not, this plaster was done recently by Mr. K.K. Mohammed in the past 7-8 years or 10 years, because otherwise this was also all red.
So even this plaster that we see now is not exactly the original?
No, it was done later.
We are at Diwan-e-Aam now, and this is just what we see here is just a bare bones of what it must have been at that time.
See, this would have been, first of all, it was all plastered and gilding, gold painting all over the place. All this would have been, the carvings that you see would have been brought out in gold. Apart from that, if you see it from outside, you can still see some of the hooks. It would have all been draped with carpets and velvets and brocades. If the emperor wished to honor somebody, he would invite him to the throne, and that Nashemane Zille Lahi. And they would go there, and then he would, with his own hand, sometimes he would give them a sarpech, which are those ornaments you see on the turbans. So it was the Mughals, as did the Delhi Sultanate, they followed the Persian etiquette of court, and this was from the Sassanid Empire. So,
and the other account that you talk about is the change with the seasons. It's I mean, that is quite fascinating, how from the summer to the autumn, winter, the change that happens. That's also very fascinating.
So every season had its own charm, it had its own food, it had its own, everything around it, the paraphernalia, which would be observed. As a child, I remember my mother would never wear silks in summers or cottons in winters. So she would have her own particular boxes where everything would be packed away. The summer clothes are packed away, the monsoon's clothes would be taken out. So this is somebody, we are very ordinary people. So you can imagine what the kings and the queens must be doing in those days.
Yeah. Rana, one thing though, it strikes a reader when one goes through the book. I mean, they seem to be only celebrating and there are only festivities. Didn't they ever work?
By 1803, the British have taken over the administration of Delhi. In fact, there's a very famous saying, Sultanate Shah Alam as Dilli ta Palam. That the kingdom of Shah Alam is only restricted from Delhi to Palam. And by the time Bahadur Shah comes, it's only restricted to this Red Fort.
That's it.
And even in the Red Fort, he could not do anything without the permission of the resident and the Kilidar, that is the British commandant who used to live here.
One thing I wanted to ask you about the difficulty of translating something like this. So it's some of it is Persian and then Urdu, and then it's all a very idiomatic, the language they speak. So what are the problems that you faced while translating it?
Persian is very limited. There were just a few verses in Persian, but otherwise the whole thing is Urdu. There is a lot of problems. See, I understand all the nuances of the language that is being said. I know the history that is being talked about. But as far as the idioms are concerned, the language of the Delhi, lady especially, was very, very idiomatic. It has a special name, Dilli ki Begmati Zaban, and the language spoken in Delhi also. So translating that into English, however much I may understand it, is difficult, because as my editor said, that when I could find equivalents to every Urdu saying of Muhavra, but like he said, that this is too English. It doesn't go with the rest of the ambience of the book, where I'm talking of a particular culture and a time frame.
We are at Rang Mahal, the women's quarters, right? If you would like to, describe a life of the women at that time.
See, within the fort itself, there was the palace area where only the women could come in, where the women lived, and only the emperor and the eunuchs and the female warriors would be guarding them, and the emperor could come in. Now, a lot of the book is set in that area, from just after Diwan-e-Khas all the way down till what is now called Mumtaz Mahal, which was actually the Choti Baithak and Badi Baithak and all these places. They would be, it would be very richly furnished, and of course carpet, bolsters, cushions and brocades and velvets, and the Here Bahisht flew through it. It was a cooling stream underneath the marble of the flooring to keep the whole thing clean, and then suddenly it would come out, the stream would come out wherever there was an open space, and there would be fountains and pools, so just to make it cool and give the effect of heaven. Because it is just here that in the Diwan-e-Khas that you have the verse written, Gar Firdaus bar ruye zami ast, hami ast, hami ast, hami ast. If there is a heaven on earth, it is here, it is here.
Which is sort of mistakenly said to be of Kashmir, isn't it?
Yes, and it is not written by Hazrat Amir Khusro. We don't know who the writer is.
I see.
But it is not in any of his diwans. In Hazrat Amir Khusro's diwans. So here the women would live, and there were so many celebrations all the time. There would be some celebration happening, and a very interesting celebration that is described in the book is the Jashn-e-Taj Poshi, or the celebration of the coronation of the emperor, where they would soak urad dal, and then they would make vadas out of it. So the dal would be soaked by the chief consort in Bahadur Shah's case it was Zinat Mahal, and when it was ground, then the first vada would be put into the oil by the Badshah himself.
Wow.
So such a very syncretic custom, because a lot of, like, Bahadur Shah's mother was also a Rajput. Most of the Mughals had a lot of Rajput blood in them, and there were so many women from different areas living in the harem, and so they assimilated and they adapted, and they, you know, all the customs into their own customs. And when you see there's a description of Dasera, and when the Dasera is being celebrated in the court, there's a formal court being held, and at that time a Neelkant is let loose. A Neelkant is the victory, the bird in Hindu customs. So all these things, you see a beautiful amalgamation of the customs of India. I won't even say Hindu or Muslim, because they're all Indian customs that have been, like Eid, Bakrid, Muharram, all this is being celebrated and observed inside the Red Fort, along with Holi, Diwali and Raksha Bandhan. When they talk of harem, they think it is about women who are sexually available to the emperor. It's not that. These women are there for a lot of the women did performed administrative tasks. So say in a harem, only about 5% would be those who were in an intimate relation with the emperor. The rest would be his relatives, his aunts, mother, the father's wives, and you know, like sisters, nieces, etc., etc.
We are at Diwane Khas, where the emperor held a special court, and where the peacock throne was, correct?
So this is actually, this building was the only building that's made completely of marble, and it was heavily decorated with inlay work of precious and semi-precious stone. It had a silver ceiling, and this is where, as you said, the peacock throne was kept, and where the emperor would call his special nobles there for or give them audience. In 1857, when the emperor was captured, the British soldiers drank to the health of the queen, right here. And after that, when the Darbar is held in 1911, then the same Jharoka from where the emperor would give Jharoka darshan, the King of England also gave Jharoka to his subjects. So things keep changing, and that's how it is. And in this book, you know, there is a very beautiful sentence by Bahadur Shah Zafar, where he says that we also took the crown from somebody, and somebody has taken it from us, and that is the way of the world. So that's the way of the world, that things come, things go, people come, people go, emperors come, kings come. Nothing is permanent in this life, and that's what we should realize.
Thank you so much for being with us. It was an absolute pleasure, and many congratulations once again on the book. I'm sure, you know, it will do extremely well, and it's really a fascinating account of the life inside the Red Fort. Thank you very much. And as I said in the beginning, Bibliofile is this sort of a new channel that we have started in the Outlook website, where, you know, it's all about books. We'll be talking to authors, reviewing books, taking excerpts. So anything that you wanted to know, anything about books, that's the place to come to.